You're watching the Run For It YouTube channel. I'm Finlay, and this episode is a 100-kilometer review of the New Balance 1080 v14 running shoes. We've been testing these out over a range of paces and distances, so we can give a really accurate review of how these perform on the run. We'll also cover all the technical updates and how they feel and fit. Starting with the upper of the new 1080, it's moved to a triple jacquard mesh. Now, without going into all the technical details, this is one of the most premium materials you can use to make an upper, so this should translate into more comfort. It should be softer against your feet. There is meant to be more breathability in the new upper, and there's still some padding on the inside of the heel collar and a little bit of padding on the tongue. From a fit perspective, they feel pretty comparable to the last model. And by that, I mean you still get this sock-like fit from the upper, kind of conforms to the shape of your feet. But because it's quite soft and quite flexible, it's not overly tight. Although in saying that, I did get some hot foot for around the first 15 to 20k of running in these. And by that, it literally mean that my feet were getting quite warm, and as a result getting a bit irritated throughout a run. Thankfully, that's gone. I don't know if that is because the upper has stretched slightly, maybe the midsole is compressed a bit so there's a bit more volume in the toe box, or maybe I've just got used to it. I'm not sure, but it's definitely something to comment on because I'm sure some runners also may experience a similar sensation. So with that in mind, you can use a 1080 if you have a broader foot shape. I have a pretty broad forefoot, but there are probably better options out there for you if you do have a wide forefoot shape. And these are likely to suit runners who have a slightly narrower foot shape or who simply prefer a more encapsulated fit from the upper. And also, if your feet swell a lot during the run, if you know that happens to you, even though this stretches, again, a slightly broader fitting shoe might be a better option for you. The only point I'd probably change on the shoe is the heel counter, because even though there's some support there and these are neutral running shoes, it is very flexible and it does feel sometimes like the upper would just benefit from a touch more structure, particularly on the medial section of the heel counter. As mentioned earlier, we've run over 100 kilometers in the 1080, and we've done some pretty specific sessions at very set intensities so we can establish how these perform over various effort levels. So for example, we've done easy miles in them at around 4:45 to 5 minutes a kilometer pace. We've done 15-16 kilometer runs at a more focused aerobic effort, so around 4:30 to 4:35 minutes per kilometer pace, and we've even done a long 25k run averaging just above 4 minutes per kilometer pace. Now, we know all of those paces are going to mean very different things for people, so the key is that we're going to focus on how the midsole performs at those different intensity levels. Let's come back to the test runs in a second, as it'll be helpful to cover the tech updates to the midsole. So when it comes to the Fresh Foam X midsole, it's still the same stack height as the previous model. So we've got a 32mm high heel and a 26mm high forefoot for a 6mm drop. But some of the key changes are that there's higher sidewalls and more vertical sidewall geometry. So that should improve the inherent stability of the midsole, which is very important because the Fresh Foam X compound in the 1080 is particularly soft. Next up, the rear foot displacement of the midsole is 11.5% higher, and the forefoot displacement is 6.5% higher. So in simple terms, that just means there's more cushioning. However, the most important change to the 1080 is in the outsole. This new section of rubber in the forefoot contributes towards an increase, or a stiffness increase of 9% in the forefoot area. And this is absolutely critical to the performance of the midsole, because there was definitely quite a bit of feedback in the previous version that the forefoot section was just too soft. and that was leading to bottoming out. So essentially, the midsole was compressing so much that runners were finding they were losing just too much energy through the midsole, and it was becoming almost harder work as you were toeing off. So having this stiffer forefoot construction will actually then improve that rocker functionality. It will help transition the foot forward with more ease, and it will actually lead to a better sensation of cushioning. So even though there's that slightly more stiffer element to the forefoot, the actual perception of cushioning is likely to be higher. How does the midsole feel on a run then? Well, at easier efforts, the midsole feels exceptionally soft and plush under your feet. But in contrast to the previous midsole tooling, you definitely notice the increase in responsiveness and better structure to the midsole. So my main feedback is this translated into smoother transitions from landing to takeoff. Even though it does feel more stable, it still sits on the soft end of the cushioning spectrum. So there's definitely neutral shoes which feel a bit more stable underfoot than the 1080. And overall, these are perfectly suited to those easy miles, but they're going to favour runners who really prefer that ultra soft underfoot feel and or have very stable feet. For me, the cushioning ultimately felt best when started to pick up the pace slightly and run at a steadier effort. So around that 4:30 to 4:35 minute per kilometre pace. And I know that pace is going to mean different things for people, but the purpose of talking about the different pace brackets is when you're going, say, 15, 20, even 25 seconds faster than your easy run pace, that's when the midsole really starts to perform. And for me, the reason that that became the case was just because it felt bouncier, felt a bit livelier to run in. You could kind of feel that energy return coming through from the midsole. I still find at the easy efforts, I'm still getting a touch too much compression in the forefoot, whether that doesn't seem to be the case when I'm running steadier. So I think for a lot of runners, these are going to be exceptionally comfortable mileage shoes for those steady runs. And because there's quite a lot of cushioning under your feet as well, when you're running 15, 16k or even further, 20 to 25k, it feels really protective. So you're not going to have to worry about the impact at the end of your runs. Now, testament to this Fresh Foam X compound is the fact that it performed relatively well for a 25 kilometre run averaging 4:04 minutes per kilometre pace. However, this was definitely the ceiling for the cushioning. It was just starting to compress too much and just lacking that energy return that you really need at that sort of effort. And for me, if you're then trying to find what that's relative to you, that sort of pace is a hard, steady effort. So I'm not running tempo, but I'm definitely working at quite a high intensity and really with a very focused level of effort going into the session. So very impressive, but feedback was really just in the last third of that run, starting to notice the muscles were working slightly more, perception of effort was increasing a little bit more than it normally would. And this is very anecdotal, but the following day, I 100% had slightly more muscle soreness, a little bit more tightness and fatigue in the tendons and in the muscles than I normally would running that sort of session in a slightly more responsive option. Now, New Balance says if they could make one running shoe, it would be the 1080. And we can see why they say this, because these clearly offer exceptional versatility and they feel very good across a wide range of paces. But as we just mentioned, there's definitely a ceiling to these and they're not the best option for those harder, steady runs. Yes, you can use them for that, but it's likely you're making that type of session unnecessarily hard by not opting for something which offers a bit more help and is a bit more responsive. So overall, the 1080 are definitely best suited to those easy to steady paced miles. But importantly, they're going to suit runners who prefer a very soft underfoot feel. And what's important to mention is that the rocker doesn't feel overly prominent. And why this is key to talk about is I'm quite a heavy heel striker, and that's why I don't find these the best for my easy runs, because I almost feel because I'm compressing the midsole too much, I'm not getting as much help from the midsole as somebody who's maybe landing in a slightly different way. For me, something that's a touch more responsive with a slightly more prominent rocker just makes those easy miles feel even easier to run at. So this is just worth mentioning. If you're a heavy heel striker, you might just find that the midsole compresses a little bit too much for you, and you're maybe having to work a touch hard to get up and over the cushioning on those easy efforts. However, on the flip side, for runners who really prefer that soft plush underfoot feel, this is just going to feel amazing for you to run in. To finish then, there's no doubt these are a great update to the last version, and the New Balance 1080 V14 are one of the best daily mileage running shoes out there. These have been going down incredibly well with Run For It customers since the launch in November, so we know a lot of runners are absolutely loving these. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching this review. If you have any questions at all, please make sure to comment on the episode and we'll get back to them as soon as we can. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. See you soon.